my name's Anika Tabachnick, and I'm the Creative Aging Program Associate at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. This is a new position for the museum. There's never been a full-time staff member working just with our creative aging programs, which is the programming that we run for seniors. And I've been able to come to this position through funding through Washington Service Corps and AmeriCorps, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, is sort of similar to Peace Corps. It's a federally funded program that gets people into communities doing all sorts of different kind of work. And this is our second show and tell. I thought that I would be the guest just so that I could introduce myself. I feel like I showed up on the island in October and everything was shut down, and then I just sort of appeared in different things people were doing, and it would probably be nice if for people to know a little bit about what I'm interested in and the kind of things that I've done in the past. So for a little bit of history background, I actually lived in London for the last 3 years, going to school for my undergraduate degree, which was in curating. And as the pandemic started to become apparent that it was going to really affect everyone's lives, I ended up taking the last plane to San Francisco back from London, because I was just, worried about being away from my parents if they needed help, and about my immigration status because my student visa was running out and I didn't want to get stuck anywhere. And so I went back to my hometown in California. And while I was there, I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I sort of stumbled upon this position at BEMA, and they were actually in the very end of their interviewing process, which I didn't know. I found Kristen Tollefson on the website, and I sort of guessed what her email might be, and I just sent her a random email. And I think she sort of reluctantly said, okay, I guess I'll meet with you. We're at the very end of interviewing people, so, don't get your hopes up, basically. And now I'm here, which is amazing. And I just put up on this slide my email address. Please feel free to write that down somewhere and get in contact with me. I'm always happy to just chat with people, especially moving to the island at such a weird time. But also, if you want to get involved with any of the programs that are happening or have an idea for something, I would really love to hear from all of you. And so today for my show and tell, I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 projects that I did before I came to the island. And then I'm going to talk about one of my favorite artists. And I think that it will be pretty clear how influential her art is to what I do, which I think is just a really special thing to share. So the first project that I want to talk about, and I think, when you say that you do curating, there's a lot of ideas and assumptions that people can have about what that looks like and sort of what that means to you. But for me, what I'm really interested in is education and how we can use art as an educational tool, as a way to build things together and to connect with each other. And so this photo is from, I sort of recruited my housemates in London. You know how there's usually studio tours? I don't know, I'm sure they have them on the island, like open studio sort of weekend. So there's something like that in our neighborhood, but instead of showing none of us are fine artists. Instead of showing any art, we decided to host, we called it a 24-hour figure drawing event, like marathon. And during the day, we had drawing with kids. So this is the image of that, kids and parents, who, and then in the nighttime, we had more like traditional figure drawing for adults only. And part of what I found really special about this project, aside from that it was just a nice thing to do to meet our neighbors and we had, in that household, I was living with 2 single moms, so there's 2 kids in the house, so sort of bringing together their friends and the different groups that we all were in. But also just the idea of sort of turning our home into a museum, into an art space for a day, and seeing how it transformed things and letting people have really some sort of ownership over like our private space, which is a really interesting, a little bit scary in some ways experience. And you can see once the event happened, we decorated our whole living room with all of the art that people made, and they could come back and see it like a very informal conceptual gallery. This is my my housemate's daughter, Margarita, who's about 8 in that photo, and then my other housemate's boyfriend, and they're working together to figure out how they want to arrange things in the living room. And then this is just an image. And obviously it was also wonderful to have a sort of a change of scenery in our living space. We got to have everyone's art decorating it. And then the other project I wanted to talk about is called, sort of informally, it's called We Want to Yell/Hide in the Art Gallery. And this is a project that I did with elementary age kids. And I did this as part of my sort of final project for my undergraduate degree. And what my goal was, and like my intentions for this project, was to figure out and experiment with elementary school kids about how they could feel ownership over the gallery space, and how they could observe and notice some of the different structures and norms of that space. Like, we talked a lot about how you think you're expected to act, what's like a good gallery visitor, which I think everyone has some idea about that. Maybe a parent has told you, oh, like, we're going to the museum, be quiet, and, just look with your eyes. And we're sort of playing with that idea. And you can see this first photo is from when they first came to the gallery, and the show that was happening there was very like conceptual. It wasn't art where you would necessarily look at it and get like what the narrative is or what kind of ideas are happening there. So partially it was just interesting to see, like, why are there these yoga mats on the floor? Like, what kind of questions they're asking. And then this other photo is connected to a lot of the art that was in that gallery was about how people interact with technology and how our bodies are affected by technology, which I think is super topical when we're all on Zoom, or at least me. I'm like working from home and I'm hunched over my computer a lot of the time. So this is them pretending to be like distracted gallery visitors who are just on their phones and sort of like bumping into each other. And then this one is from us, I think the prompt was sort of to move around the space and to be basically a bad gallery visitor. Like, what do you think that would look like? And these two boys were sort of like motioning at the art, and they're like, what even is this? Like, this is just some I think it's like a spine. They're like, what is this? Like, it looks like a chicken bone on the paper. And personally, it's like those kind of things that I get the most inspired by. And the really amusing thing about this is that the artist was actually there that day. So, and she was very into it. She was a completely good sport, and she was just sort of laughing along. And I think she also gained some new understanding of her artwork from that. And then the final piece of this project in this gallery was more of a figure drawing piece as well. And this is partially because a lot of the artist's work was figure drawing, and it was figure drawings of people doing she came up almost with like yoga poses, but they had to do with how you interact with technology. So it would be like yoga pose of like someone hunched over or like clicking on their phone, stuff like that. So we had them sort of making up their own poses, and there was this whole little sort of false living room space as well. So it's fun. We did one part of the project in our actual living room, and one part of the project happened in this totally staged living room, but people were doing really similar things. And then, so that's just an idea of some of the projects that I've been working on, or I've worked on in like the last 2 years. And obviously what I'm doing now at BEMA is really different, because instead of working with kids and families, I'm working with seniors, and it's sort of the other end of our age spectrum, and just brings so many new things. I mean, I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to be working with a different group of people, though obviously I love working with kids. I'm a very kid-oriented person in a lot of ways, and have done childcare and stuff like that for my whole life. So that I think affects everything that I do. And then the artist and artwork that I wanted to share with you all today is by Mierle Laderman Ukeles, and she is an artist from New York City. And this piece of work that I'm going to talk about, it was a performance piece, and she did it in the 70s. So a little bit before my time. And she's one of my favorite artists, but more than that, I think she's the artist who's influenced what I do and how I understand the world the most. She's probably most well known for this art that she made in the late 60s and early 70s, which is what I'll be sharing with you today. And her art is pretty conceptual, and it often includes some sort of performance aspect, though it's not all performance. One of the things that really drew me to her work was how I feel like she sees the role of the artist as similar to that of an activist. So the work she does, it's trying to empower you to change something or sort of notice what types of structures or norms or societal values are taking place in a way that it's really visible. And I think it's the kind of thing where you don't need to be sort of like a specialized group or have any like artistic background knowledge to be able to relate to it in a really personal way. So just to talk a little bit about what's happening in these images, here's another one. This performance was at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford, Connecticut, and it took place in 1973, and it was her first public artwork ever. And I think there was about 4 different performances that were part of this. The one on the stairs here, which was called Washing Tracks Maintenance Outside, and the artwork was her cleaning the building's front steps as visitors walked in and out through the day. And she called these works, both inside and outside, floor paintings. So it's sort of the translating just the act of cleaning steps into a painting. And they're completely impermanent, like it was just her washing them everything with water, as anyone who was doing that sort of like janitorial work would be doing. And in each of these performances, really what I like about it is that because she's an artist, she's allowed to do this. It's sort of like the magic of being an artist. Her role as an artist sort of made her be able to do these sort of unobtrusive things. Like, you know, you'd notice someone mopping the floor of a gallery and you'd sort of be like, okay, and walk by and go on looking at the paintings in the wall. But her doing it and making it like, this is my artwork, sort of made it really visible and explored what it means for this kind of labor to be really visible, which, not to get too like philosophical about it, but I think especially right now with the pandemic, thinking about all of the work that goes behind just maintaining our health and safety and cleanliness, and the level of care that people are sort of providing to us, even just by like wiping down the, you know, conveyor belt at the grocery store. Like, something about that is really touching to me. And I think thinking about, so for her, partially this work is motivated by, she was like a very new mother, and a lot of it came from thinking about how the daily acts of taking care of her children, which are these acts of love, like even if it's just a little thing, like, you know, helping someone blow their nose, like that's an act of love and caring and maintaining someone else's life, basically nurturing and maintaining someone's life. And then thinking about all these people who their work is basically nurturing and maintaining our lives. So just to give some context, other work she did was with New York sanitation workers. She met every single New York City sanitation worker and took a photo with them and thanked them and shook their hand. And that was our artwork, I think, a few years after this one. She also choreographed ballets with garbage trucks, which is a whole nother thing that I don't think we'll have time to get into. But something about that right now was really ringing true and touching me. And you can see, so she took photos of the performance and then she sort of documented them. And one of the things that I think is interesting and shows a little bit about how this connection to her like motherhood and caring for her children, and then her art also being coming from a very caring place, is, I'm not sure if you can really tell from this image, but here she's laying out cloth diapers on the steps leading up to the museum, sort of to absorb the water. And there's two parts to that. There's like her bringing the actions of her daily life as a mother like out into a public space, but there's also those kind of like cloth diapers were used in the archives of the gallery to protect certain types of art, just because the material like won't affect glaze and stuff. So she's sort of really making clear this connection between the care for objects and people in an art gallery, and then this other kind of care for her family and for her kids. And this idea that the personal is political, which is sort of came out of, feminist and student activist movements at the same time. I think it's something that someone in my generation can take for granted. Oh, of course, anything can be like a little political act. Like, we want to think about how things are affecting our daily lives. You almost don't think about it, but I think this idea that like individual action in your home or how you relate to your identity. So for example, how she relates to her identity as an artist or a mother could actually be representing something that's more structural and social. And I think one of the things that I really feel like I was introduced to her work at, it was one of those things where it's like, it was like the right time for me to be affected by it. And what I was influenced by the most, I think, is this idea that someone's art can be the things that they know the best. It doesn't have to be some sort of individual separate thing where you're an artist and you sort of have some deep creative genius and you go and isolate yourself and create something beautiful. Obviously, it can be that, but it can also be those sort of like daily moments and how they're valuable to you, and how you understand your role at home or in your workplace or in the world, and how those things affect other people, because that's really what thinking about she used the word maintenance, but it's thinking about like how we're all maintaining and caring for each other. And I pulled up, this was the note that was next. I think it's when she was actually in the gallery, but it says, "Dear spectator, the cleanliness of this area is now being maintained as maintenance art by Mierle Laderman Ukeles, artist. Please feel free to continue on your way right through the dust painting, as she will continue to maintain it this whole day." And I thought I would recreate this. This is probably the most well-known image of this artwork at BEMA, and sort of try to embody her a little bit. And obviously we didn't have water. We didn't want people to slip on the steps. So it's a little bit staged, which could mean a whole other thing. But I think for me, what this art, what I learned from it was a new way to think about the work I was doing with young people in museums, and about my role as someone working in a museum, and how I could relate that to my own personal desire to take care of people, and that there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Yeah, I think that's it for my screen sharing. aspect, but I'd love to just open it up to anyone if you have questions, or anything you'd like to share.
Go ahead, you're on.
Hi, I'm curious of what this artist did to become the artist that was known that would allow her to have this kind of artwork. I mean, it could, to make this space between, how did she get known to be able to be the artist to do those things?
Yeah, I don't know that much about sort of her career trajectory prior to being an artist, but I do know that she she went to Pratt and she studied in New York and a few other places on the East Coast. And so she had, and she studied as an artist, and she sort of had artistic connections from school, as many people do. But this work that she did was before she was really known at all. It's in many ways, it's sort of like what put her on the map.
I mean, I'm thinking like going in and talking to somebody and saying, I have this idea.
But that,
you know what I mean?
The impression is like, that is really what she did. For her next piece, which was with the New York sanitation workers, she got a grant, which was sort of vaguely related to like, do something that will show, you know, appreciation for people who are working in the community. But this piece, it was very much coming from this, like, I have this idea and I know someone who works in this gallery. Will you let me do it? And it wasn't until it sort of it really came at the right time, because she was, it was sort of dealing with a lot of themes that people were talking about, like about women's work, for example. But it wasn't until after that that people like took the photos and the notes that she wrote as part of it and put it into a gallery on the wall. So maybe that's just a sign that we should all start going out and doing things like this and seeing how they land. I mean, it can't hurt.
Pretty interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of her later stuff, once she was more well-known, is things that you couldn't do like that. A lot of it has to do with climate change and environmental, has lots of environmental themes, and involves like a lot of collecting and arranging things in really grand ways, which obviously you need a lot more resources to do. But
yeah.
Yeah, she went pretty far with a bucket of soap water. And
some of her, one of the other things that was like right after this that really sort of like cemented her as an artistic figure at the time is she had her second child, and she basically decided that she was going to document all of her activities as a mom. And then that actually became a gallery show that people saw. So that was sort of in her timeline too. So some similar stuff, like she wrote like her schedule of like what she did, like every time she touched her child, basically like any type of little action, like pick the baby up, put them down, take a nap, you know, feed them, burp them, like everything like that. And collected all sorts, like I think there's like a shirt that her baby like drooled on and stuff that was part of that show, which honestly I just find something about that like really lovely. But also at the time,
you haven't had your first child yet.
Yeah, that's true.
You're doing all of that.
I find it lovely for someone else to and making it being like, this is my art. And I think there's a quote from her that was something like, when I'm taking care of my kids, I'm thinking about my art, and when I'm doing my art, I'm thinking about my kids. So for her, it was a way to combine them and figure out how to be a mother and an artist, which, similar to Kristen, I think it's interesting. Last month, Kristen was talking about how she was really connecting to Katha Kollwitz's work before she really had those life experiences. And I feel like I'm not a parent. I don't know how that feels. And I haven't, like, I don't think that's something that you can necessarily understand fully unless you've done it. But I still really relate and feel connected to the things that she's doing. Obviously, I know it from like the child perspective. I'm rolling on stuff.
The woman who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer, on her sort of description of herself, her first description is mother, which, I thought about if, how many men who were writing a book would start with that. So it's kind of, this is like bringing to the fore the idea of work or art, or work as art or whatever, that might not be seen that way.
Yeah, I love, I read Braiding Sweetgrass probably like about a year ago at the beginning of lockdown. And I thought it was just like wonderful and inspiring in a lot of different ways, but I didn't notice that. So it's a very interesting, it's an interesting thing.
I was thinking about the time, it was 1973 and it was her first child. And it was like the first generation where a lot of women were going out into the workforce. Yeah. But to, it was one of those, like, because I was in that time and I was a mother and I was working and trying to do all of it at the same time. But when I was at work, I was always thinking of my children. Yeah. And when I was at home with it, I would think about, what I have to do at work. And, that same kind of thing that she actually did physically to show everybody, men and women, and to a young person like you, about balancing life. And I think that's a really strong statement she was making, and one that really nobody had ever made before when it came to, I think, performance art, is that, the wonderful magnitude and the lovingness of being a parent. Boy, it really struck me. I also used to be a professional house cleaner. My parents had a cleaning business, and I started working with them at 10 years old in their business. Did it, the family business, but I never thought at that time that it was a loving, caring thing that you're doing is when you're cleaning. And that was another thing that struck me too, is that you're caring. And I love the idea what you said, Anika. Let's go out maybe and do a performance art in our neighborhood and see what happens. And maybe I'll go out in front of my building here and do splash some water and do some brooms and mops and see what happens.
They'll hire you.
Yeah, maybe someone will tip you or something. If you do, please document it and let me know how it goes. But just speaking to that, I think the thing of it is it's both like being like working and being a mom, but also the idea that being a mother actually made her a better artist, and being an artist made her a better mother. It wasn't like thinking about her children was somehow compromising her work, or that caring about her work was compromising how she was raising her kids. And there's some really wonderful photos of like her with her toddler, like making art in an art gallery with like you know, the kid playing with blocks sort of in the background and stuff like that, which I just find like very charming. And just before I say goodbye, a little signposting to stuff. We have a few different creative aging programs that they're all happening virtually right now. And then we also have art kits that are distributed through Island volunteer caregivers. So if you're sort of in their care network, you could express your interest about that. And then we have our shows happening, which is Kimberly Trowbridge Into the Garden, which is all her work from Blodell, from being artist in residence at Blodell. And then on the bottom part of the museum, we have our show Breathe, which is a group show of social justice and human rights sort of themed work. And with Kimberly, I know that as we speak, there's a bunch, or not a bunch of people because Corona and it's very safe and socially distanced, but there's a few volunteers getting ready like a walking tour of Blodell according to Kimberly and inspired by her art. I'm not sure how that's going to be distributed out to the public, but it looks really exciting. So you could go walk around Blodell and sort of see where she painted different things that are in her show. So
she has that on, I think it's through the museum, but where she's walking through the gardens and then she tells what she's painted and she gives the explanation, the backstory. And we just both watched it last night. It's absolutely fabulous.